of the word itself. They fail on all three prongs. The false and defamatory claim that Mr. Trump gave a speech his supporters to go attack the Capitol has been repeated so often, uncritically, with any examination of the underlying facts that the Americans listening at home were probably surprised to learn it's not true. Furthermore, some of the people in this room followed Mr. Trump's statements and tweets in the weeks leading up to January 6th very closely. We know that he was not trying to foment an insurrection during the time because no one, from the Speaker of the House to the Mayor of Washington, D.C., behaved in a fashion consistent with the belief that violence was being advocated for. Mr. Trump did not spend the weeks prior to January 6th inciting violence. He spent those weeks pursuing his election challenge through the court system and other legal procedures exactly as the Constitution and the Congress prescribe. To believe, based on the evidence you have seen, that Mr. Trump actually wanted and indeed willfully incited an armed insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government would be absurd. The gathering on January 6th was supposed to be an entirely peaceful event. Thousands and thousands of people, including Mr. Trump, showed up that day with that intention. A small percentage, a small fraction of those people then engaged in truly horrible behavior, but as we now know, that those actors were pre-planned and premeditated and acted even before the speech was completed, to which is the basis of the article of impeachment.
People that my grandmother knows, who know people.
Pre-planned and premeditated by fringe,
it's friends of
left and right
family of friends of hers.
They hijacked the event for their own purposes.
And they were never part of it.
The House manager's false narrative is a brazenly dishonest attempt to smear, to cancel constitutional cancel culture, their number one political opponent, taking neutral statements, commonplace political rhetoric, removing words and facts from context, and ascribing to them the most sinister and malevolent intentions possible. Their story was based not on evidence, but on the sheer personal and political animus. The flimsy theory of incitement you heard from the House managers could be used to impeach, indict, or expel countless other political leaders. Many leading figures in other parties have engaged in far more incendiary and dangerous rhetoric. And we played some of it. I'm not going to replay it. I'm not going to replay the words. You all saw the evidence. I'm not going to replay mob scenes. I don't want to give those people another platform, any more view from the American people as to what they did. They should be canceled.
Just do it, understand.
Democrat politicians spent months prior to January 6th attacking the very legitimacy of our nation's most cherished institutions.
Sorry, I want to have it be better quality for you guys.
Institutions
and traditions.
There we go.
There's Krispy Kreme.
They didn't just question the integrity of one election. They challenged the integrity of our entire nation.
Second time I'm watching this. I watched
everything from our founding fathers.
This is day 5.
Our Constitution, Declaration of Independence, law enforcement officers, and United States military. They said that our society was rooted in hatred. They even said that America deserved, and I'll quote, a reckoning. As you heard yesterday, throughout the summer, Democrat leaders, including the current president and vice president, repeatedly made comments that provided moral comfort to mobs attacking police officers. During that time, many officers across the country were injured. As we all know, 2 sheriff's deputies in Los Angeles were ambushed and shot at point blank range.
You gonna bring up that evidence of that guy?
Members of this very body have been in
just came up,
danger.
right?
Senators
you gonna
from
bring up
Maine,
Jaden X
Kentucky, and most points
and how
in
he was there,
between
and he
have been
wanted Trump
harassed
dead?
by mobs.
That's kind of big evidence.
Last August, a menacing left-wing mob swarmed Senator Rand Paul and his wife as they left the White House, and they had to be rescued by police. For months, our federal courthouse in Portland was placed under siege by violent anarchists who attacked law enforcement officers daily and repeatedly and tried to set fire to the building. Speaker Pelosi did not call the violent siege of the federal building an insurrection. She called the federal agents protecting the courthouse stormtroopers. The White House complex was besieged by mobs that threw bricks, rocks, and bottles at Secret Service agents, set fire to an historic structure, and breached a security fence to infiltrate the Treasury grounds. When my client's administration sent in the National Guard to secure the nation's capital city amidst the violence, Democrat leaders demanded that the forces be withdrawn. The Washington, D.C. mayor said the presence of the National Guard was an affront to the safety of the district. It must be fully investigated whether political leadership here in Washington, D.C. took an inadequate and irresponsible forced posture on January 6th because of their commitment to the false narrative of what happened last June.
If you don't bring up him,
hopefully, we can all now agree that the administration acted properly by taking action to stop a riotous mob, establishing an appropriate security perimeter, and prevent the White House from potentially being overrun. The House managers argued this week that an alleged brief delay in issuing a public statement from Mr. Trump on January 6th was somehow evidence that he committed incitement or supported the violence. Yet for months last year, Joe Biden, Vice President Harris, and countless of other Democrats repeatedly refused to condemn the extremism as riots were occurring daily, as businesses were being ramshackled.
Bring up that Kamala Harris bailed out criminals.
Bombs were exploding. They repeatedly refused to tell their violent supporters to stand down. Some even suggested that the mob's actions were justified. Vice President Harris literally urged her followers to donate money to a fund to bail out the violent, extreme rioters so that they could get out and continue to do it over and over again. She later said that those folks were not going to let up and that they should not. All of this was far closer to the actual definition of incitement than anything President Trump has ever said or done, never mind what he said on the 6th. It's a hypocrisy. It's a hypocrisy that the House managers have laid at the feet of this chamber.
He brought it
The House managers suggested
bring up Jaden X.
that this recent history is irrelevant to the current proceedings.
Bring up Jaden X.
But not only is Democrats' behavior surrounding last year's riots highly relevant as precedent, and not only does it reveal the dishonesty and insincerity of this entire endeavor, it also provides crucial context that should inform our understanding of the events that took place on January 6th. Many of the people who infiltrated the Capitol took pictures of themselves and posted them on social media. To some, it seems, they thought that it was all a game. They apparently believed that violent mobs, destruction of property, rioting, assaulting police, and vandalizing historic treasures was somehow now acceptable in the United States. Where might they have gotten that idea? I would suggest to you that it was not from Mr. Trump. It was not Mr. Trump. It was not anyone in the Republican Party that spent the 6 months immediately prior to the Capitol assault giving rhetorical aid and comfort to mobs, making excuses for rioters, celebrating radicalism, and explaining that angry, frustrated, and marginalized people were entitled to blow off steam like that. Let me be very clear. There can be no excuse for the depraved actions of the rioters here at the Capitol or anywhere else across this country. 100% of those guilty of committing crimes deserve lengthy prison sentences for their shameful and depraved conduct. But this trial has raised the question about words, actions, and consequences. As a nation, we must ask ourselves, how did we arrive at this place where rioting and pillaging would become commonplace? I submit to you that it was month after month of political leaders and media personalities bloodthirsty for ratings, glorifying civil unrest, and condemning the reasonable law enforcement measures that are required to quell violent mobs. Hopefully, we can all leave this chamber in uniform agreement that all rioting is bad, and that law enforcement deserves our respect and support. That has been Mr. Trump's position from the very beginning. The real question in this case is, who is ultimately responsible for such acts of mayhem and violence when they are committed?
Let's see.
The House Democrats want two different standards, one for themselves and one for their political opposition. They have carried out a grossly unconstitutional effort to punish Mr. Trump for protected First Amendment speech. It's an egregious violation of his constitutional rights. Since he uttered not a single word encouraging violence, this action can only be seen as an effort to censor disfavored political speech and discriminate against a disapproved viewpoint. It is an unprecedented action with the potential to do grave and lasting damage to both the presidency and the separation of powers and the future of democratic self-government. Yesterday, we played you a video of countless Democrat members of the Senate urging their supporters to fight. We showed you those videos not because we think you should be forcibly removed from office for saying those things, but because we know you should not be forcibly removed from office for saying those things. But recognize the hypocrisy. Yesterday in questioning, House Manager Raskin admitted that the House Democrats had invented an entirely new legal standard. In fact, they've created a new legal theory, the Raskin Doctrine. The Raskin Doctrine is based on nothing more than determining protected speech based on the party label next to your name. Regardless of what you have heard or what you have seen from the House managers, if you pay close attention, you will see that any speech made by Democrat elected officials is protected speech, while any speech made by Republican elected officials is not protected. The creation of the Raskin Doctrine actually reveals the weakness of the House manager's case. Elected officials, and we reviewed this in depth yesterday, under Supreme Court precedent, Wood and Bond, and by the way, Bond didn't burn his draft card. He actually still had it. It was part of his defense. But in Bond and in Wood, the court clearly directed all to know that elected officials hold the highest protections of speech, the highest protections. And I remind you why. because you all need to be free to have robust political discussion, because your discussion is about how our lives are going to go. And that shouldn't be squelched by any political party on either side of the aisle, no matter who's the majority party at the time.
Whoa, whoa. Did a pen explode on his hand?
Why would the House managers make up their own legal standard?
Look at his one hand.
I'll tell you why.
The hand.
Because they know they cannot satisfy the existing constitutional standard set forth by the United States Supreme Court that has existed for more than half a century. They argue Mr. Trump, as an elected official, has no First Amendment rights. It's the complete opposite of the law. We've shown you without contradiction that is wrong. They also know that they cannot satisfy the three-part test of Brandenburg, as elucidated in the Bible Believers case. There was absolutely no evidence that Mr. Trump's words were directed to inciting imminent lawless action. There was no evidence that Mr. Trump intended his words to incite violence, and the violence was pre-planned and premeditated by a group of lawless actors who must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but it proves that his words weren't what set this into motion. What was the incitement? With no ability and no evidence to satisfy the existing constitutional standards, what do the House managers do?
You're bringing up this information.
They had to make up their own law.
You show Jaden X
this is not only intellectually
and
dishonest,
you therefore win.
Folks,
you will win this case.
It's downright
100%.
scary. What type of precedent would be set if the Senate did vote to convict? Can Congress now ignore Supreme Court precedent on the contours of protected free speech? Will Congress be permitted to continually make up their own legal standards and apply those new standards to elected officials' speech? This would allow Congress to use the awesome impeachment power as a weapon to impeach their fellow colleagues in the opposing party. This is not a precedent that this Senate can set here today. If the Senate endorses the House Democrats' absurd new theory, you will set a precedent that will trouble leaders from both parties, literally, for centuries to come. But that will not be the only disgraceful precedent to come from this case.
I like your glasses.
This has been perhaps the most unfair and flagrantly unconstitutional
I like things when I see people the first time around.
Of the United States
but
Senate.
I've seen some people long hair, short hair, and they look good with both, you know.
For the first time in history, Congress has asserted the right to try and punish a former president who is a private citizen. Nowhere in the Constitution is the power enumerated or implied. Congress has no authority, no right, and no business holding a trial of citizen Trump, let alone a trial to deprive him of fundamental civil rights. There was mention of a January exception argument. The January exception argument is a creation of the House managers'
He's like kind of fumbling over his words. He's like
conduct by delaying.
He's just dumbfounded.
They sat on the article.
He's having trouble because
they could have tried the president while he was still in office if they really believed he was an imminent threat.
He's afraid of losing his job.
They didn't.
Sort of.
The January exception is a red herring. It's nonsense.
Why are the bottles of water? Wait.
Because federal, state, and local authorities can investigate.
Bottles of water all have the labels taken off. Can't recycle them then.
Always expires on January 20th. House Democrats and this deeply unfair trial have shamefully trampled every tradition, norm, and standard of due process in a way I've never, ever seen before. Mr. Trump was given no right to review the so-called evidence against him at trial. He was given no opportunity to question its propriety. He was given no chance to engage in fact-finding. Much of what was introduced by the House was unverified, second or third-hand reporting cribbed from a biased news media, including stories based on anonymous sources whose identities aren't even known to them.
Anonymous.
Never mind
Anonymous. Not anonymous. But, that's just a
manufactured
nitpick.
and doctored evidence.
Otherwise, I love this guy.
So much so that
I
they
love you,
had
man.
to
You're
withdraw
amazing.
it.
For speaking up.
We had the evidence after we started the trial. They went on for 2 days. So in the evening, I was able to go back and take a really close look at the stuff. Myself and Mr. Castor and
Bring
Ms.
up
Bateman
the
and Mr. Brennan.
Jennifer Lorne.
We all worked hard and
Lawrence
looked at the evidence, 4 volumes of books in little tiny print. And we literally had, 12, 14 hours to really look at the evidence before we had to go on. And just in that short time of looking at the evidence, we saw them fabricating Twitter accounts. We saw the masked man sitting at his desk with the New York Times there.
Yes.
And when we looked closely, we found that the date was wrong, the check had been added.
Yes.
They fabricated evidence. They made
I
it
proved it yesterday, and they're bringing it up.
They never addressed that in their closing. As though it were acceptable. As though it were all right. As though that's the way it
The
should
date
be
was
done
wrong
here
based
in
on the
Senate of the United
meme.
States of America.
They're bringing this stuff up. They're not showing, but
Fraud.
Still.
Flat out. Fraud. Where I come from, in the courts that I practice in, there are very harsh repercussions for what they pulled in this trial. As we've shown, the House managers were caught creating false representations of tweets, manipulating videos, and introducing into the record completely discredited lies such as the Fine People hoax as factual evidence. Most of what the House managers have said and shown you would be inadmissible in any respectable court
This
of
guy's
law.
got a pair of balls
They were not trying
size of bulldozers for crying out loud, my
They were
man.
telling a political tale.
He's telling them off
fable,
like you did this,
and a patently false one
fake.
at that. House Democrats have denied due process and rushed the impeachment because they know that a fair trial would reveal Mr. Trump's innocence of the charges against him. The more actual evidence that comes out, the clearer it is that this was a pre-planned and premeditated attack, which his language in no way incited. Because their case is so weak, the House managers have taken a kitchen sink approach to the supposedly single article of impeachment. They allege that Mr. Trump incited the January 6th violence. They allege that he abused power by attempting to pressure Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger to undermine the results of the 2020 election. And they allege that he gravely and endangered the democratic system by interfering with the peaceful transition of power.
Excuse me.
At least 3 things there. Under the Senate rules, each of these allegations must have been alleged in a separate article of impeachment. I need not remind this chamber that Rule 23 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials provides in pertinent part, that an article of impeachment shall not be divisible thereon. Why is that? Because the article at issue here alleges multiple wrongs in the single article, it would be impossible to know if 2/3 of the members agreed on the entire article, or just on parts of it, as the basis for a vote to convict. Based on this alone, the Senate must vote to acquit Mr. Trump. You got to at least obey your own rules if it's not the Constitution you're going to obey.
Like he brought up
In
the
short,
thing.
this impeachment has been a complete charade from beginning
And they didn't
to
give
end.
him time to do
the entire spectacle,
the research to show more
has
footage
been
and
nothing but the
video and,
unhinged pursuit
like,
of a long-standing political vendetta against Mr. Trump by the opposition
if it was
party.
me, I would
As
have
we have
found
shown,
out every
Democrats
piece
were
of
obsessed with impeaching
that I could have
Mr.
proposed.
Trump
I would have brought
from
up
the
the
very
Jaden X
beginning of his term.
info. Like,
The House Democrats tried to impeach him in his first year. They tried to impeach him in his second year.
third.
They did impeach him in his third year, and they impeached him again in his fourth year. And now they have conducted a phony impeachment show trial when he is a private citizen out of office.
Yeah.
This hastily orchestrated
He is a
and
private citizen.
unconstitutional
But I wonder
circus is
why
the
they
House
have
Democrats'
the bottle
final
of hand sanitizer
desperate
with the label on
attempt
it,
to
but not the
accomplish
water
their
bottle.
obsessive desire of the last 5 years.
Really weird.
Since the moment he stepped into the political arena, since my client stepped in, they have been possessed by an overwhelming zeal to vanquish an independent-minded outsider from the midst and to shame, demean, silence,
don't
and
like Trump
demonize his
because
supporters.
he wasn't part of
In the
politics.
desperate hope that they will never, ever pose an electoral
wasn't
challenge.
the same.
We heard
Wasn't.
one of the congressmen on the screen. If you don't impeach him, he might be elected again. That's the fear.
We don't impeach
That's
Joe
what's
Biden. He'll be
driving
elected
this
again
impeachment.
for sure. If he even makes it to his
When
first
you
year.
deliberate over your decision, there are 4 distinct grounds under which you must acquit my client. First is jurisdiction. There is no jurisdiction. And if you believe that, you still get to say it. 2, Rule 23. It had to be divisible. Each allegation had to be singularly set out in front of you so it could be voted on and to see if 2/3 of you think that they proved that case or not. They didn't do that. You got to ask yourself why. They know the Senate rules. They got them, and so did I. Why'd they do it? Because they hadn't investigated, first of all. But also, what they found out as they were preparing all of this, they couldn't do it. So if they threw as much in as they could and made as many bold, bald allegations as they could,
Bold allegations.
then maybe 2/3 of you would fall for it. That's why the rules
'cause
don't
I ain't
allow
part of
it
the
to go
2/3.
that way. Due process,
Not
I've
one
exhausted
person.
that subject. It's a really good reason for all of you in this chamber, to stop the politics, to read the Constitution and apply it to this proceeding.
He roasting them like a chicken.
And acknowledge that the lack of due process, way over the top, shocking, and you must not stand for it. And of course, the First Amendment, the actual facts of this case. There were no words of incitement. 4 grounds. Nobody gets to tell you which ground to pick, and nobody gets to tell you how many grounds to consider. Senators, do not let House Democrats take this manacle crusade any further. The Senate does not have to go down this dark path of enmity and division. You do not have to indulge the impeachment lust,
everything except for
the dishonesty,
I would have went
in
and
it is time to bring this unconstitutional political theater
or some
to
point
an
during
end.
that time brought that up.
It is time to allow our nation to move forward. It is time to address the real business pressing this nation: the pandemic, our economy, racial inequality, economic and social inequality. These are the things that you need to be thinking and working on for all of us in America. All of us. With your vote, you can defend the Constitution, you can protect due process, and you can allow America's healing to begin. I urge the Senate to acquit and vindicate the Constitution of this great republic. Thank you.
So hard. You roasted him so hard. I'm glad I came on here when I did. You just saw him tell them they were making the fake stuff. They were faking things.
Mr. President, Senators, I understand, I'm told we have around 27 minutes, but I will return all of that, but perhaps 5 back to you. There's just a few things that I need to address, and so in an extraordinary and unprecedented
Let them have their
act
full
of
time.
self-restraint on my part, I will resist the opportunity to rebut every single false and illogical thing that you just heard, and I am going to be able to
They're
return
not
to
false.
you in perhaps 22,
faked.
23 minutes.
Okay.
Few points.
I mean, you watch my video from yesterday.
We have definitely
please
made
go
some
watch
progress in the last few days, because a few days ago, the president's team, although I think it was perhaps a member who has since left the team, lectured us that this was not an insurrection and said that the impeachment managers were outrageous in using the word insurrection. Today, counsel in his closing statement said it was a violent insurrection, and he denounced it. And I would certainly love to see President Trump also call it a violent insurrection and denounce it too. And I believe, although I don't have a verbatim text, that counsel called for long sentences for the people who were involved. Again, I would love to hear that come from the president as well. The distinguished counsel complains that there's no precedent with the developed body of law that the Senate has for impeaching and convicting a president who incites violent insurrection against the Congress and the government of the United States. Well, I suppose that's true because it never occurred to any other president of the United States, from George Washington to John F.
Okay, I can't watch the rest of this. Yo, I'm out. I was live for about half an hour. I can't. The guy did roast him. He brought up the fact that they've added a check mark to a Twitter account, which I proved yesterday. If you didn't see my video, I know no one really watched this, but I hope you guys do. And yeah, peace.